All right, so we started chapter 10 a little bit a week ago and talked just a little bit about bonds. Does anybody remember the little bit that we talked about?
Bonds issued at a discount and at two.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. So we talked a little bit. So we talked about the face of the bond, and there's three things that are always on the face, and then we can issue them at what Jessica said, a discount or a premium. What three things were always on the face of the bond?
Maturity date
Maturity date, yep.
Face value.
Face value,
and carrying value.
and what was that?
Carrying value.
Stated interest.
Stated interest rate. Yeah.
Oh.
All right, in face value. So we have a $100,000 bond, 10-year maturity date, 6% interest. All right, so the bond is a $100,000 bond. It is good for 10 years at 6% rate. Those three things are given to us. Right? Those are the three most important things about the bond. And remember, the difference between a bond and a note is that a note, you have to take what the bank gives you. When you go to borrow money for a car, they tell you what they'll give you. When you go to borrow money for a house, they're going to tell you what interest rate they're going to give you. A bond market is such where you go and you find people that will give you money at the terms you give them. That's the main difference.
Can you please repeat that difference again? So
When you are on the bond market, you go and say, I want to borrow money. I want to borrow $100,000 at 6% for 10 years. Who wants to give me money? Okay? Whereas a bank, they will tell you what the terms are. So, a couple important things. Remember, market rate does not equal the stated. Okay? They are not the same thing. You will always calculate interest based on the stated interest rate and the face value. All right? Always the same. When a bond is issued at 100%, it's issued at face value because you take 100 times the face value, that's the amount. So the perfect journal entry is cash, $100,000, bonds payable, $100,000. That means the bond was issued at face value. You got 100, you owe 100. Now, that is when you go out there and you get exactly the $100,000 at the interest rate that probably is close to what market is at. You did not have to issue it at a discount. You didn't have to issue it at a premium. You issued it at face value. When we issue it at a discount, we issue it at less than 100%. We issue it at a discount. And what we do there is we go and we say, you give me $95,000, I'll pay you back 100. Does that sound like a good deal? You give me $95,000 today, and in 10 years, I will pay you back 100. Does that sound like a good deal? Everybody right now should be saying yes, because I'm going to give you $5,000, right? Right. Here's the catch. The market rate is probably about 8% or higher. I'm only going to give you 6. I'm going to give you $5,000 at the end, but I'm going to pay you less interest over the next 10 years. So you have to decide, as the person who's lending me money, is that worth it to you? Is it worth it to get $5,000 extra but take less interest over the next 10 years? And one way you can look at it is, how much interest are you going to get? You're going to get $100,000 times 6% times 10 years, which is $60,000. So you're going to get $60,000 plus 5. So you're going to get $65,000 at the end of 10 years. $60,000 in interest plus the $5,000 extra. Pretty good deal, right?
That's if you invest in the bond? Or
That's if you invest in my bonds.
Okay.
If you put your money on the market, Right now, it's 8%, which could get you, over 10 years, $80,000. So $65,000, $80,000.
80,000.
Huh?
80,000 is good.
80,000 is good. What could be the disadvantage with the market?
It could fall.
It could fall. Is it always going to be 8%? I can tell you no. But will it go down or will it go up? We don't know. You have to decide as an investor, do you want to take the safe route and know you're going to get 65,000? Do you want to invest in the market? That is your decision. One of the reasons people invest in the bond market is because it is safe. People that have money to put in bonds have lots of money. So they diversify, safe and risky. Right. Now the flip side of a discount, Jessica said, was a premium. That's when you issue for higher than 100%. So let's issue at 102.5. What does that mean? That means it's face value times 102.5, or you pay me $102,500 today, I pay you back $100,000. Does that sound like a good deal? You give me $102,500 and I'm only going to give you $100 back. Most of you should say no. Would you want to give me 20 and I give you 10 back in a month? No. But the difference here is the market is probably lower. The market rate is probably 4%, 5%, and I'm going to pay you 6%. So I'm going to give you a higher interest rate than the market. So over the course of time, you might get around $40,000 from the market if it was trading around 4%. But for me, you're going to get the 60. You got to subtract out the $2,500 that you're going to lose in what you pay me back. But you're looking at $57,500 versus maybe $40,000. So paying me more up front and getting less back could actually pay you more money because you're getting a higher interest rate. So why would I want to do a premium or a discount? First of all, if I can't issue it at face value and I need money, I have to do something to attract you guys. So, depending on what the market is, and my circumstances will depend on the type of bond I issue. If I need money, but I can't pay the market interest rate, right? I don't have enough money to every month give you 8%. But I can take less money now, knowing that 10 years down the road, I will be able to pay you back more. Whatever I'm investing in is going to pay me back down the road. So I will tell you, hey, give me less now. I will pay you back more later. And I won't give you as much interest now. So that helps me. I need money now. It's going to pay me a lot later. So give me less now. Give me the money to do my investment. I'll pay you less interest year after year, but in the end, I'll pay you more money. That's why someone would do a discount. Or they need money and they need more now. They need a big lump sum now. But they don't know what they're going to be able to pay you back. So they'll pay you more interest month by month or year by year, knowing that at the end they're going to have to pay you a smaller amount. So it all depends on the person borrowing the money and the market rate, what they think they can do and how they're going to attract people. So that's the interest rate. So if the interest rate's lower, then they're willing to pay more than face value. If you're going to give them a higher interest rate, they're going to be willing to pay more than face value. So you got to, again, decide, what can I do? And if you're going to pay more than a higher interest rate, you can use some of this money to help pay your interest. Right? If the market rate is higher then they're not going to pay as much. It all depends on what you as the borrower can do as an interest rate. You have to attract the people. And remember, the people in the bond market, they're going to diversify. So that's why they're putting it in. Just because they could get more interest, they also got to remember this $65,000 is pretty much guaranteed. The bond market is safe. That's why people invest in the bond market. Stock market, safe? Yes or no? No. Right? Depends on what stocks you invest in, I guess, right? Google's been pretty darn safe for a while. Will it always be safe? We don't know the answer to that question, right? I would say at some point it's got to go down. But I also said that like 11 years ago, and it hasn't gone down. So I'm not the right person to ask. So what do you need to remember about bonds? You need to remember that interest is always calculated off those two numbers. It is not calculated off the discount or the premium. Biggest mistake you guys make on the test is you take the interest rate and you multiply it by the discount. Yeah.
I have a question. So there has been periods of times in which the stock market fell really down and everybody fell into a crisis and all. Why does that happen?
It depends on everything else that's going on in the economy. When people feel the economy, something bad happens, the first thing people do is sell stock to get their money back. They panic. And when some people start panicking, other people start panicking. And then they panic, and then they panic. So when the housing market crashed and the prices of houses went down, people started panicking and they started selling, because they needed money, their stock. When they started selling their stock, it made other people sell their stock, and it's kind of a ripple effect. So it's just, and sometimes it's there. I mean, sometimes it's companies go under. When a company goes under, people lose their stock, they lose their cash, they panic. I mean, so a lot of times it's a panic mode. But it's also a matter of sometimes it's companies failing. So when companies fail, their stock goes. So you see big dips. Big dips are a lot of times based on news and economy news and world news and what's going on in Washington, which is why we've had a lot of this. Because Washington's doing a lot of this, up and down. So you got to take your interest rate times your face value. Every time you calculate interest, it's the stated rate times the face value. It does not matter if it's a premium or a discount. Interest rate is what's in the bond. Face value times stated interest rate. All right, every time. The bond payable is always the face value. It doesn't matter what you issue it at, discount or premium. That affects the cash. It does not affect the bonds payable. There's been a question on the third exam, there's been a question on the final, and it gives you a whole bunch of words, and then it says, what's the bond payable? You get the bond payable almost in the very first sentence. It says it was a $100,000 face value of a bond. And then it goes and blah, 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 and the market rate and the stated rate, and it was issued at a discount, and all this stuff. What's the bond payable? $100,000. I've already put that on the board. Right? I could go up here and do the journal entry to issue it at a discount, and it would be cash of $95,000, bond payable of $100,000, and the $5,000 would go to what? Take a guess.
Discount.
Discount on bond.
So
If it's a premium, what am I going to do?
premium bond.
It's going to be cash of 1025, bond payable of 100, and the 2500 would go to premium on bond. So the bond payable in all three examples is $100,000. What is my interest in all three cases? What did we say? How much interest was I going to pay them in all three cases? $60,000 or $6,000 a year. All right. How do you know which one to give me? Well, if I say 60, the answer is 60. If I say 6, it's 6. All right. If I ask per year, it's pretty easy. So 60 60, and then I already erased it, but it was 60 under here too. Doesn't matter if it's face value, discount, or premium. Interest is face value times the stated interest rate. Those are the things you need to know about a bond. So let's take a look. Now, another way you could see it worded here, they issue 100 bonds at $1,000. It gets you $100,000. It's the same thing I did here. I just said 100,000 instead of 100 bonds at 1,000. So the same journal entry that I have on the board, cash and bonds payable. Now notice how they worded this one. They didn't say 107.26 with a percent sign. They just said 107.26. They like to give you some whacked out numbers in your homework. I like to do rounded. Notice this one's, you end up with 107,260. I gave you 95,000. All right, so they just like to have longer numbers. So in this case, how much cash did I get? What's my debit to cash?
1,000 times 100.
What?
1,000 times 100.
107,260. They took 100,000 times 1.0726, just like we took 100,000 times 1.025. All right. When we do that, we get 107,260. The bond payable is still 100,000, and the premium is $7,260. It is exactly what I have right here, and it's exactly the same journal entry that we have right here. Same thing, just a bigger number.
So this one using a premium.
That is a premium, yeah? Because it's greater than 100.
Does company need have all three of these?
No, they don't have to have all three. I'm going to do whatever I need to do as the person who's issuing the bond to get my money. I might do a premium, I might do a discount, I might do face value. I'm not going to do all three. It's kind of like LIFO, FIFO, and weighted average. You don't do all three. All right, so this bond is issued at a discount. They actually give you the dollar amount again. So how much cash did I get? 93,376, which means this bond was issued at 93.376%. And the discount is $6,624. And then if we go ahead and we calculate interest, we go back to the face value times the interest rate. We don't look at the 107,000. We don't look at the 93,000. We look at the 100,000 times the 6%. And we did that journal entry many times. Interest expense, interest payable. Okay. Now the other way you could see this worded is you could say the bond was issued at 93. The bond was issued at 107.26. That is the same thing as saying 95%. It is the same thing as saying 102.5%. If it says issued at 93, it is 93%. If it says issued at 102.5, it is 102.5%. So if I ask you for the cash proceeds, I'm backing up. If I ask you for the cash proceeds on this problem, the answer would be 93,376. If I ask you for the cash proceeds on this problem, before the bottom line, you would have said 100 times 1.0726. And you would have given me 107,000. Asking for the cash proceeds says, how much money did I get from the bond? And that would be the face value times whatever you issued it at. In this example, it's 100,000 times 0.95. In this example, it's 100,000 times 1.025. Cash proceeds is how much cash did you get. All right, so we won't do amortization in here, but just to kind of show you what happens. When a bond is set at 107,260, over time, that's called the carrying value. The bond is worth 107,260. Over time, we're going to use up that extra cash to help pay our interest until eventually we get down to 100,000, because in the end, we're going to pay back 100,000. We won't amortize it in this class. If you're going into accounting and intermediate, you will learn how to do that. But eventually the carrying value on that bond will go down to 100.
So is this going on in, you're testing this on exam?
No, I just said I'm not testing you on the exam, okay? I'm just showing you what happens to the premium. Same thing on the discount, except for here, you issued it at less than 100, so you don't have extra cash to help pay for the interest. So you're still going to go through and look at the proceeds, but you're going to add with that discount. You got to come up with not only the interest, but help eat up that discount, and you'll get the face value eventually by the time you pay back the loan. And eventually you'll get to that face value. Okay, let's work a small problem before we go through some of these steps here. So what happens when we're done with the bond? A bond is said to be retired. All right? We retire a bond. In a perfect scenario, we retire a bond at the end of its life, 10 years. So at the end of its life, we pay back the $100,000, whether we did a discount, face value, or premium, and all we do is debit bonds payable and credit cash. Everybody's happy. All right? Now, a bond holder is fully expecting you to go the full time. Because when they invest in that bond, they're investing on the fact that you are going to pay them 10 years of interest. That's how they made that decision to do the discount or the premium, is based on the fact that you said 10 years. So in the event that you decide to pay it off early, there's usually going to be a penalty. Okay, you will say something like you're going to pay the bond off early, so you're going to pay it back at 102. That's the same thing as kind of a premium. You're going to pay back more than 100,000 for their inconvenience of you paying it back 2 or 3 years early. Because if you pay them back early, they're not getting that $6,000 for those 2 to 3 years. Now they're getting their money back, so can they turn around and invest it again? Yes, but that wasn't the plan.
Why companies do that?
Why do companies do it? Because they want, it could be a lot of different things. They have the money, so they want to pay it back. Interest rates drastically changed, so they're paying you too high of interest, so they don't want to. Or they want to invest in something where they can get a higher interest rate. So a lot of big bonds are like school districts, and municipalities do school districts. So when a school district does a tax increase, they might pay back an old bond and take out a new bond. Okay, the new bond they might actually use to pay back some of the old bond, so that they only have one bond at a time, or 2 bonds at a time. So they'll pay back the old bond. But when they do that, they might pay it back at a premium. This example has an error. Right there it says cash payment 103, but it says 102. So that blue box is an error. It should say 102. So 10 years ago, they issued a bond at 100,000. They are going to retire it at 102, meaning they're going to pay $2,000 more than they're supposed to. So they're going to pay a loss on the retirement of the bond. So the cash is going to be 102,000. The bond payable is still 100. That's all they owe. They're going to have a loss on the retirement of $2,000. They're paying extra to retire early. The person that they're paying it to is getting $2,000 extra. Okay, so what's the word contingent mean? Don't overthink it. Whitney, you stretching? Okay. If I tell you this, your grade in this class is contingent on your next test. Dependent. It's dependent, right? Your grade is dependent, right? Because if you get an A, it's drastically going to help you. And if you fail it, it's drastically probably going to hurt you. But of course, what did I tell you?
You drop the...
I don't drop tests. I will replace if the final is better. That's drastically different, okay? I used to drop, in the face-to-face classes, I used to drop a test. And you know what people would do? They just wouldn't study for the third test. And they'd be like, I'm dropping that test. That completely did not achieve my teaching goal. Because if you just dropped your third test, you didn't study for it, which means you did not do well on the final. Because you didn't study for your third test. So I don't drop tests. I will only replace if you do better. So therefore you have to study for all the tests. So I don't drop tests. Okay? And now I actually changed too, where I don't drop a homework assignment. I will give you the extra points if you do them all. So therefore it's bonus. So it encourages you to do all the homework assignments. If you do every homework, I do it for online as well, you can get 130 points out of 120, right? If you do every quiz, you can get 65 out of 60. And if you do every Learn Smart, you can get 65. Now, yeah, I get perfect scores, so it also helps you in the fact that if you don't get perfect scores, you can still get 120 out of 120 in homework.
Wait, what about quizzes?
Quizzes too.
You have to get perfect score?
No, but if you don't get perfect scores, if you got all fours, you can come pretty close to getting 60 out of 60. So I do it to help. I used to drop, but that didn't help people that did them all. It hurt people that did them all, and that wasn't what my plan was. So contingent means, what do you do from the accounting standpoint for contingent liabilities? Liabilities that might happen. And so what we're going to do is, how do we account for them based on things that could happen in the future? And so we have three scenarios. The first is, what if it's probable it could happen? What if it's possible it could happen? And then what if it's remote? So first of all, if it's probable that something is going to happen in the future, you have two scenarios. The first is, yes, you can estimate how much it's going to cost. If you can estimate how much the liability is going to cost you, then you have to put it in the books. If it's reasonable that it's going to happen and you can estimate the amount, you have to record it as a liability. If it's reasonable but you can't estimate the cost, then you have to describe it in the notes to the financial statements. So let me give you an example. Even though this happened a while ago, you guys should all remember when BP had their oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and it caused a major disaster. Do you think that they knew they were going to have a liability? Do you think they knew they were going to have to clean it up?
No, it was an accident.
Oh no, they had a huge liability. It was not an accident. Okay? They were at fault, drastically. Okay? They had to pay for all the cleanup. Okay? And they had some lawsuits on top of it. So they did have a liability. And it was very hard for them to estimate the cost, but they could estimate a very minimal cost. Okay? They had huge liabilities. And they got bigger and it got bigger and it got bigger as the oil spill got bigger and bigger because it wasn't able to be contained immediately. So they could go in and estimate the liability. All right? And then they had to go in and do it again and do it again. So that did hit their books as soon as they were able to come up with that number. Right. Other liabilities are harder to estimate. So then they're going to have to state them in the notes to their financial statements. If it's also probable, reasonably probable that they're going to have a liability, then they just have to state it in their financial statements. If they don't know for sure, but it's reasonable, then they just state it in the financial statements. Basically what they're saying is, you have to say something if you have a good chance. You cannot just say, oh, I don't know how much it's going to cost, we just won't say anything about it. It doesn't work like that.
So, like the company Johnson & Johnson, will
Yes.
so they have to say that in their financial statement?
They would have to say something. And so like you see the different lawsuits on TV, some of them will say that they're not really warranted. But when you see something like with the talcum powder and that type of stuff, Johnson & Johnson might not have a dollar amount, but it's in their financial statements. All right. When cars have brakes go out, or like Samsung had phones exploding, all right, they didn't really know the extent of that phone and if anyone got hurt, but they had to put something in their financial statement. Because did they have a liability on all those phones being replaced? Absolutely. Did anyone sue them for bodily harm? Don't know about that one, right? But they had to put something in their financial statements. Another one that hits a little bit closer to home is something called a pension liability. A pension liability is when companies have employees pay into a pension. Not a lot of companies have that anymore. It used to be really big a long time ago. But state companies, like I pay into a pension. I mentioned that I don't get Social Security anymore. I pay into a pension. My husband pays into a pension. Union people pay into a pension. Once you hit a retirement age, you can get that pension. if you retire. But if you're not retired, you don't get it yet, all right? The company is required to pay you. That's called a liability. There is difference of opinion with new accounting rules of what you have to do with that liability. Do you state it as the fact that it's reasonably probable that this many people will be taking it? Or is it a accounting journal entry showing this is how much people will be taking? And it came up a year ago because different people had an opinion on that for the college, that it needed to be a journal entry showing the number of people that could retire and the pension liability that it would cost. And it actually showed the college in financial distress, which the chancellor wanted to show the college in financial distress because we were doing a layoff. But those people weren't retiring. And so there was a big disagreement on whether it needed to be a journal entry or whether it needed to be in the notes to the financial statement. And we had a whole bunch of people that kept coming to the accounting faculty to say, where should it be? Because they wanted us to like make the answer, and we're like, they're not asking us, right? So that's what basically, when does it become a journal entry or notes? It's got to be in one of them, all right? Remote, that means it's not going to happen. So remember my example of I told you the person who they put a thumb in their chili and said that they found it at Wendy's, but then it turned out to be his own thumb. All right, it shocked Wendy's, it made the news, and the next day it went away, right? That doesn't hit the financial statements because there is no lawsuit. So you don't mention it, you don't cause panic to your shareholders, it just doesn't even hit the financial statements. All right, we have two ratios this chapter. You should have seen one of them. I didn't put times interest earned on your annual report because it's a very good ratio for companies, but not so much from a average one that you guys will run into a lot, and definitely not one from a personal standpoint, but debt to asset is. What is debt to asset ratio? Who remembers what it was? You just turned it in today. Liabilities over assets. This is one that all of you, personally, business people, and those going into accounting, have to know. Because in your personal life, your debt to asset ratio really needs to be good. Because if it's close to 1, that means your debt equals your assets. And what does that mean in your personal life? If your total debt equals your total assets.
That you're not making any profit?
Okay, it doesn't mean profit. There's no profit in there. Your total debt and your total assets equal each other.
You borrowing as much as you earning.
You're borrowing as much as you have. Everything you have is financed with debt. That means you own nothing outright. That means your house is 100% financed with debt. You have no equity. Your cars are 100% financed with debt.
Is that what cash for is?
That is even more than cash poor. Okay? People say they're cash poor when they live paycheck to paycheck.
Okay.
This means you own nothing. And I don't mean right now because you guys don't own anything because you're in college. Okay? You're in college, you're not supposed to own anything. Okay? That means you literally own nothing. You cannot go and sell contents. Clothing and stuff excluded, okay? But when you buy a house, you usually put down some money on a house. If your debts equal your assets, you don't own any part of your house. If you went to sell your house, you would get no money. This is kind of what happened back in 2008 when the housing crisis hit. People bought houses at a high amount. The housing market crashed, and the houses were worth less than they borrowed. So when they went to sell them, they could sell them for $250, but their loan was $300 or $350. So even if they tried to sell, they couldn't even get it. They still owed the bank $100,000. There were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that walked away from a house, just walked away. Just didn't even care. Out in Vegas, they had houses in that area that people just walked out of because it was cheaper for them to have bad debt and just leave an empty house than it was to deal with the bank. Student loans and all that stuff, you do not want that, all right? And it's much easier not to have that happen nowadays. But that's when you are buying things way above your head. All right, so you just don't want that to happen, and businesses don't want that to happen. All right, so debt to asset, you want to be low. It is one of the very few ratios you want to be low. You want to have more assets than you have debt. Times interest earned basically is trying to figure out how much interest you have to pay your debt. Does your credit card company care if you only pay the interest on your credit card? No, that's actually what they want. They want you to pay your interest and not your principal, because that means you're going to constantly have a credit card bill. That's not good. That's not what you want. That's what they want. All right? That's why they did some credit card reform. You guys on your first credit card can only get up to like $500, I think it is. And on your credit card, it will tell you how long it's going to take for you to pay your credit card off if you only make minimum payments. That way you can see that it's going to take you 20 years to pay off $1,000 or something like that. So you take net income, you add interest and taxes back, and divide by. So for General Mills, their debt to asset is 0.71. It means 71, almost 72% of their assets is financed by debt. It's kind of high. It's not 1. So the only way you're going to know if this is really high is to compare General Mills to what?
Other companies?
In their industry. Yep. Not just anybody, but other companies in their industry. Yeah. Looks a little high to me, so you'd want to do a comparison. On the other side, they have more than enough money to pay their interest. They can pay their interest 9 times. So a company would be more than happy to loan them more money because they can pay their interest. That's how you look at that. All right, that is chapter 10. So let's look at some problems with bonds again.